there is a craft that requires, more than almost any other, a particular relationship with death, a relationship that is neither sentimental nor afraid, that is technical and precise and entirely comfortable with the physical fact of a body that is no longer living and must be made to look as though it might be. Taxidermy in its legitimate form is a preservation craft. It is the art of making a dead thing appear alive in perpetuity, of capturing a moment of life in a medium that will outlast the life it represents. The best taxidermists understand both the biology of the animal they are working with and the aesthetics of how that animal appeared in motion and in rest, and they bring both kinds of knowledge to bear on a process that is, when done well, genuinely skilled and genuinely demanding. Nolan Hatch of Sylva, North Carolina, had been doing this work since 1913. He was considered, by the people who brought their deer and turkey and fox to his workshop on Scotts Creek Road, to be among the best practitioners in the mountain counties of western North Carolina. Meticulous, naturalistic, with a particular gift for the eyes, which are the part of a mounted animal that most quickly reveals the quality or deficiency of the taxidermist's work. His workshop was attached to his house, a single-story building of roughly constructed timber with a large workroom and a storage area that was kept locked. He was a quiet man who managed his business professionally, charged fair rates, and delivered work on schedule. He attended church. He had no enemies that anyone was aware of. He was 55 years old when he died of a heart attack in his workshop on a Tuesday in March 1947 and was found by a neighbor who had come to collect a finished mount. The Jackson County Sheriff, a man named Howard Pell, arrived at the Hatch property within 2 hours of the discovery. The initial examination was straightforward: an apparent natural death, the body in the workroom, no signs of distress or foul play. Pell ordered the standard estate inventory to facilitate the property's administration and assigned his deputy, a man named Earl Cartwright, to conduct it. Cartwright began the inventory the following morning. He completed approximately two-thirds of it before going to the telephone and calling Pell and asking him to come back to the property. The locked storage area was what Cartwright had found. Pell's inventory report, filed with the Jackson County Probate Court in April 1947, is in the Jackson County Courthouse records in Sylva. It is a complete inventory of Hatch's property, the equipment in the workroom, the client's mounts in various stages of completion, the personal effects in the house, the tools, the materials, the financial records. The inventory of the storage area occupies 6 of the report's 14 pages. It describes what Cartwright found behind the locked door in the flat, professional language that a sheriff's inventory requires, and it concludes with a recommendation that the contents of the storage area be reviewed by the district attorney's office before the estate is administered further. The district attorney's review was conducted and produced a determination, filed with the court in May 1947, that the contents of the storage area did not constitute evidence of any crime defined under the current North Carolina statutes, and that the estate could proceed to administration. No crime was committed, no prosecution followed, the estate was administered. Nolan Hatch's property was sold in 1948 and the workshop was eventually demolished. The inventory is in Sylva. The district attorney's determination is in Sylva. The contents of the locked storage area are described in detail in the 6 pages of the inventory, and those 6 pages have been sitting in the courthouse since 1947, available to any researcher who requests the file. Before we begin, drop your location in the comments and tell me what time it is where you are. Nolan Hatch was a skilled taxidermist with a good reputation and a locked room in his workshop that his neighbor, his clients, and his community had never seen inside. I want to know where you are sitting when you hear what the 6 pages of the inventory describe. Jackson County, North Carolina in 1947 was a county in the southern Blue Ridge, a mountain county with a small-town economy and the particular character of communities that had been in the same terrain for 3 and 4 generations. Sylva was the county seat, a town of modest size that served the county's agricultural and commercial needs, and that had, in the mid-20th century, the self-contained quality of a place whose residents knew one another's business in the comfortable, overlapping way that small mountain towns tend to know it. Nolan Hatch had been a known quantity in this community for 34 years. His workshop on Scotts Creek Road was a fixture. His work was respected. His closed storage area was a feature of the workshop that the people who knew him had understood in the vague and incurious way that people understand the features of a familiar landscape as simply part of the workspace, the area where he kept materials or finished work waiting for pickup, or something connected to the technical side of the craft that non-practitioners had no particular reason to understand. Nobody had thought to ask about it in 34 years. Nobody had been invited to ask. The craft of taxidermy requires a substantial investment in materials and equipment that the general public has limited familiarity with. The forms, the chemicals, the reference specimens, the anatomical materials that go into producing the naturalistic poses and proportions that distinguish good work from poor, a taxidermist's storage area is to the uninitiated eye, a space full of specialized materials that require specialist context to interpret. This was part of what made the locked area at Hatch's workshop easy to not think about for 34 years. The other part was Hatch himself, who had a practiced quality of professional unremarkability, reliable, quiet, skilled. That is the most effective form of social camouflage available to a person who does not want their private activities examined. Cartwright's inventory of the storage area describes the following: the room approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, with shelving on 3 walls and a central work table. The shelving contained finished taxidermized specimens, not the standard game animals that Hatch produced for his clients, but a collection of his own work, unmounted in the commercial sense, stored rather than displayed. The collection was large. Cartwright counted 47 specimens on the shelves, varying in size from small birds and rodents to larger mammals, and noted that the quality of the work was consistent with Hatch's known professional standard: meticulous, naturalistic, the eyes particularly well done. The collection was not illegal. North Carolina in 1947 had wildlife regulations governing the taking of protected species, and Cartwright's inventory notes that he identified several specimens in the collection that appeared to be from species that would have required a special permit, but that the age of the specimens and the condition of the preparation made it impossible to determine whether they had been legally obtained. The district attorney's review reached the same conclusion. What distinguished the storage collection from the commercial work was not its legality, but its character. The district attorney's review brought in a state wildlife officer and a zoology professor from the University of North Carolina for their assessments. But before reaching their findings, it is worth being more specific about what the shelf specimens actually showed, because the inventory's 4 careful paragraphs contain more than they appear to at a quick reading. The groupings Cartwright described as suggesting compositional intent rather than storage convenience were not random arrangements. He documented 9 distinct groupings on the 3 walls of shelving, each containing between 2 and 7 specimens. In each grouping, the specimens were positioned in relationship to one another in ways that created a coherent scene, not a diorama in the commercial sense, not the kind of educational display a natural history museum might commission, but something more personal and more specific in its intent than that. The relationships between the specimens within each grouping were, in Cartwright's description, relationships that required the observer to understand them as relationships, to read the positioning and the expressions and the orientations as depicting something rather than as merely storing something. Cartwright had spent his professional life making factual observations about physical evidence and recording them in language that was as specific and as free of interpretation as he could make it. He wrote 4 paragraphs about the shelf specimens and described them as uncomfortable. That choice of word from that kind of man in that kind of document is worth sitting with. Cartwright spent 4 paragraphs of the inventory describing the arrangement and selection of the specimens, and the 4 paragraphs have a quality that the rest of the inventory, efficient businesslike cataloging, does not. He wrote, "The specimens are arranged with what appears to be deliberate care, in groupings that suggest compositional intent rather than storage convenience. Many of the specimens are posed in attitudes that are not typical of the commercial work, attitudes that are, in the deputy's assessment, more concerned with expression than with naturalism, and that in several cases produce in the observer an effect that is difficult to describe in inventory language, but that I will note as uncomfortable." He noted that several of the specimens had been posed in apparent interaction with one another, predator and prey, parent and offspring, 2 animals that appeared to be facing each other, and that the posing in these groupings had been done with technical skill, but with a thematic intention that Cartwright could not characterize as any standard function of the taxidermist's art. The central work table was where Cartwright stopped to call the sheriff. The work table contained the most recent work, a project that appeared to have been in progress at the time of Hatch's death. Cartwright described it in detail in the inventory, using the same careful, factual language that the rest of the document uses, and the description is the most difficult section of the inventory to read as a straightforward account of a craftsman's materials. The project on the work table was a large composite piece, multiple specimens incorporated into a single structured arrangement that was, by Cartwright's description, significantly more elaborate than anything else in the storage collection, and that appeared to have been in development over a sustained period, with evidence of multiple phases of work at different stages of completion. The thematic intention that Cartwright had found difficult to characterize in the shelf specimens was, in the central work table piece, considerably less ambiguous. He described it as depicting a scene of conflict or interaction between multiple specimens, the arrangement of which suggests a narrative that the deputy is not in a position to interpret but that he believes warrants review by persons with appropriate expertise. The district attorney's review brought in a state wildlife officer and a professor from the University of North Carolina's zoology department to assess the collection. The wildlife officer confirmed that several specimens were from protected species, but that prosecution was not viable given the age of the material. The zoology professor provided an assessment of the technical quality of the work, which he described as excellent among the finest amateur taxidermy he had seen, and declined to characterize the thematic content of the central work table piece beyond noting that it was unusual in its compositional ambition and in the specific nature of the interaction it appears to depict. The district attorney's determination noted these assessments and concluded that no criminal statute had been violated and that the estate could proceed. What the zoology professor declined to characterize in the district attorney's record he apparently did characterize in a letter to a colleague at Duke University, a copy of which is in the Duke University Library's special collections as part of the recipient's papers, donated in 1978. The letter describes the Hatch collection in considerably more detail than the official assessment and uses language that the official document carefully avoided. He described the work table piece as depicting, in his interpretation, a relationship between predator and prey that had been reversed in a specific and sustained way across the full arc of the composition. The prey, arranged in positions of agency, and the predator, in positions that the technical execution made unmistakably subordinate. He wrote, "The man who made this understood what he was making. The technical skill required to produce the effects he achieved is substantial. What those effects were in service of is a question I found myself unable to answer comfortably in the official review, and that I find I can only approach in a private letter." Nolan Hatch spent 34 years in a workshop on Scotts Creek Road in Sylva, North Carolina. He produced work that his clients praised and his community respected. He kept a locked room. He had been keeping it for 34 years. The neighbor who found him knew him well enough to call for help, but not well enough to know the room existed. The clients who had brought him their deer for 15 years knew him well enough to compliment his work, but not well enough to know the room existed. The community that had attended his church for 34 years knew him as a quiet, reliable, skilled man, but not well enough to know the room existed. Nobody knew about the room, nobody had asked about the room, nobody had reason to ask, because the person they knew did not seem to be the kind of person who had a room that required asking about. This is the most consistent feature of the cases in this series. The person the community knew and the person the private record reveals are two coherent individuals who occupied the same body and the same workshop and the same church pew for 34 years without either one ever fully disrupting the other. He worked in that room over a sustained period, producing a collection of 47 specimens and one unfinished composite piece that nobody saw until he died of a heart attack at 55, and Deputy Cartwright's estate inventory gave him no choice but to open the door and look. The question of the collection's subsequent fate is one that the 1948 estate sale records raise and do not answer. The buyer of the storage collection lot is described in the sale records as an individual rather than an institution, not a museum, not a natural history collection, not an educational establishment, a private buyer. The sale was conducted by an estate attorney, and the buyer is identified in the sale documentation only by initials and a post office box in a county outside Jackson County. The attorney who conducted the sale died in 1967, and his estate records, if they survive, have not been identified in any publicly accessible archive. Whether the collection was acquired by someone who understood what they were acquiring, or by someone who acquired it as a curiosity and eventually dispersed or disposed of it, is not established in any document that researchers have found. The 47 specimens and the unfinished work table piece went through a single estate sale in 1948 and then disappeared from the documentary record entirely. If they are somewhere, their current location is not known to anyone who has looked for them. Today, the Scotts Creek Road property in Sylva no longer has a workshop on it. The structure was demolished at some point in the decades after the property sale in 1948. The inventory is in the Jackson County Courthouse. The Duke letter is in the Duke University Library. The collection itself was dispersed as part of the estate sale after the district attorney's review. The commercial work in progress at the time of death was returned to the clients who had commissioned it, and the storage collection was sold as a lot to a buyer who is not named in the estate records. Where the collection went after the 1948 sale is not established in any document that has been located. Here is the question that Nolan Hatch leaves behind, and it is about the craft rather than the crime, because there was no crime, and the district attorney said so, and he was correct. Taxidermy requires a sustained, intimate engagement with the physical reality of dead animals, their structure, their weight, their texture, their appearance in repose and in motion. It requires the practitioner to develop an aesthetic understanding of how living things look and how that appearance can be preserved and shaped after life ends. It is, at its foundation, a craft of control, the control of appearance, of posture, of expression, of the impression a dead thing makes on the living observer. Nolan Hatch had been exercising that control for 34 years, producing work that his clients found naturalistic and beautiful. In his locked room, he had been exercising the same control in a different direction, toward compositions that his community had not been invited to see, that his professional vocabulary had not been available to explain, and that the most qualified observer who examined them professionally found he could only approach in a private letter. Was what Nolan Hatch built in that locked room the private work of a craftsman whose aesthetic sensibility had developed beyond what the commercial market for his skill could accommodate? Or was it something else? The product of a relationship with death and control, and the appearance of life that the 34 years of professional respectability had been running parallel to rather than being continuous with. The district attorney said no crime was committed. That is correct, and it is final. It does not resolve the question of what the worktable piece was depicting or what 34 years of unlocked doors might have looked like if anyone had thought to look. Tell me in the comments whether the locked door is the most disturbing element of this account, or whether it is the Duke professor's letter, the man who saw it in person and could only discuss it privately. Tell me where the line is between unusual and wrong. If these locked rooms and estate inventories and private letters that describe what the official assessment declined to characterize are the reason you found this channel, subscribe and ring the bell. The inventory is in the Jackson County Courthouse in Silva. The letter is in the Duke University Library in Durham. The collection is somewhere in the hands of a buyer whose name is not in the estate records. The craft was genuinely excellent. The door was locked for 34 years. The collection is somewhere. The 47 shelf specimens and the unfinished worktable piece and the second stage of whatever Hatch was building toward when his heart stopped in March 1947, a private buyer's initials and a post office box outside Jackson County. The estate attorney died in 1967. Both of those things are true, and neither one alone is the whole picture. The whole picture requires both, and both are in the record in Silva, and the record is accessible to any researcher who requests the file. There is a third true thing, which is the one the Duke professor's letter addresses most directly, and the one the official documents most carefully avoid. The worktable piece, the composite, multi-specimen, apparently unfinished project that's at the center of the worktable when Cartwright opened the door, was the piece that Hatch was working on when he died. He had been working on it for an extended period based on the physical evidence of multiple phases of work at different stages of completion. He died before he finished it. Whatever it was depicting, whatever the reversal of predator and prey that the professor described in his private letter was in service of, it was not complete at the moment of his death. There was something more that he intended to add. The estate sale buyer acquired the collection, including the unfinished worktable piece in 1948. The collection is somewhere. The unfinished piece is somewhere. And whatever was coming next in it, whatever Nolan Hatch had planned for the final stage of the thing he had been building in that locked room, is somewhere too in the intentions of a man who died of a heart attack at 55 on a Tuesday in March in a workshop on Scotts Creek Road before he had a chance to finish it.